I've been trucking for years, hauling goods across states. It's a lonely job, but it pays the bills. One night, I stopped at this rundown diner off the highway. It was a usual stop for truckers, a place to grab a meal and stretch my legs. As I was eating, I overheard a group of drivers talking in hushed tones. They were talking about some sort of competition among truckers, something dangerous. I didn't pay much attention, just thought it was some urban legend. I finished up and went back to my rig. I hit the road, cruising down the dark highway. That's when I noticed a truck behind me, tailing me real close. I thought they just wanted to pass, but they stayed right on my tail. I tried to speed up, but they matched my speed. I couldn't shake them off. Then, suddenly, they flashed their headlights, blinding me for a moment. When my vision cleared, I saw something written on the back of their truck in big letters, "Race or Die." My heart sank. I realized I'd stumbled into the competition the drivers at the diner were talking about. It was like some twisted game, a deadly race where the stakes were life and death. The trucker behind me started swerving, trying to push me off the road. I gripped the wheel tight, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to think fast, had to figure out how to survive this madness. I veered off onto an exit, hoping to lose them in the twists and turns of smaller roads. But they stayed right behind me, relentless. I could feel the fear gripping my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't know who these people were or why they wanted me in their sick game. All I knew was I had to stay alive, had to get out of this nightmare. The chase went on for what felt like hours. I was sweating, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. They kept trying to ram into me, forcing me off the road. I took a risky turn onto a narrow lane, hoping to lose them. It was dark, no street lights, just the moon casting eerie shadows. But they followed, their truck roaring behind me. I could see a bridge up ahead, an old rickety thing over a deep ravine. I had no choice. I floored it, hoping they wouldn't follow. The bridge rattled under my truck as I crossed, praying it wouldn't collapse. By some miracle, they didn't follow. I kept driving, not stopping until I reached the next town. I reported everything to the authorities, but I don't think they believed me. Who'd believe such a crazy story? I never found out who those drivers were or what they wanted. But that night changed me. One night, I noticed this truck behind me on the highway. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another driver sharing the road. But then they started tailgating me, riding real close, their headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe they were in a rush. But they stayed right on my tail, never letting up. I couldn't see the driver's face, just a silhouette behind the wheel. Then they started doing something strange, flashing their eye beams at me, on and off, like some kind of signal. I didn't understand what they wanted, but it felt wrong. I switched lanes, trying to get away from them, but they followed suit, sticking close. I felt this knot in my stomach, like something was off about this driver. They weren't just in a hurry, they were deliberately targeting me. I sped up, hoping to lose them, but they matched my speed, staying right behind me. I couldn't shake them off, and that feeling of unease grew stronger with every passing mile. I noticed they were getting aggressive, swerving closer, almost trying to push me off the road. I gripped the wheel tight, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to do something, but fear had me locked up. I took the next exit, hoping to lose them in the smaller roads. But they followed, their truck roaring behind me. I was alone on a dark road, and this driver was relentless. I tried calling the police, but my phone had no signal. It felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, with this menacing truck right on my tail. They started honking their horn, this loud, continuous blare that made my ears ring. I couldn't take it anymore, the stress, the fear. I was on the verge of breaking down. I pulled into a gas station, hoping someone would help, but it was deserted. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and that truck was still there, lurking in the shadows. I made a split-second decision and gunned it, trying to lose them in the night. But they stayed right behind me, this relentless pursuit that felt never-ending. I saw a police car parked on the side of the road up ahead and swerved towards it, hoping for help. But as I got closer, the cop car didn't move, didn't react. It was just an empty, abandoned vehicle. I felt this sinking feeling in my chest, realizing I was on my own. I had no idea what this driver wanted, why they were after me. All I knew was that I needed to get away. I made a series of turns, hoping to lose them in the maze of streets. But they kept following, never giving up. It was like they were toying with me, enjoying the chase. I finally spotted a busy area ahead and drove straight for it, hoping the crowds would deter them. As I merged into traffic, the truck fell back, disappearing into the darkness. I pulled over, shaking, heart racing. I didn't know what just happened or why. But that driver, that relentless pursuit, it felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I never saw that truck again, but the fear, the unease, it stayed with me. I've been on the road for years, hauling cargo from town to town. One night, I saw this guy hitchhiking on the side of the road. Normally, I wouldn't pick up strangers, but he looked worn out, like he'd been walking for miles. I felt bad for him, so I pulled over. He hopped in, thanked me for stopping. Seemed like a regular guy, nothing out of the ordinary. We exchanged small talk, usual stuff about the weather and the road. Then, as we were driving, he got quiet. I noticed he was staring out the window, his face all serious. I asked if everything was okay, and that's when he dropped a bomb. He started talking about this string of disappearances along this route. Said people had been going missing for years, vanishing without a trace. I thought it was some urban legend, but the way he spoke, it sent shivers down my spine. He claimed to know something about it, something disturbing. He said there was a pattern, a sequence to these disappearances. It happened every few years, like clockwork. And then he mentioned something about certain landmarks, certain stops on this route. I felt this knot in my stomach, like something wasn't right. He spoke with such certainty, like he knew too much. I wanted to just kick him out of the truck, but a part of me needed to know more, needed to understand what he was talking about. He described these places, these spots where the vanishings occurred. They were places I knew, stops I made countless times without a second thought. But now, they felt ominous, like there was some dark secret hiding in plain sight. I asked him how he knew all this, but he just kept talking, his voice low and tense. He mentioned a group, a secretive organization maybe. They were responsible, he said, for these disappearances. It sounded crazy, but the way he spoke, it was like he believed every word. He urged me to be careful, warned me to watch my back on this route. Said I should avoid those specific stops, that they were dangerous. His words lingered in the air, filling the truck with this heavy, unsettling silence. I dropped him off at the next town, and he disappeared into the night. But his words stayed with me, echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake off that feeling, that sense of dread creeping up my spine. I tried to brush it off as some crazy story, but as I drove, passing those landmarks he mentioned, I couldn't ignore the chill that ran down my spine. Every shadow seemed darker, every turn felt more foreboding. I made it through that night, but I couldn't forget what he said. Those disappearances, those spots along the road, they haunted me. I started avoiding those places, taking different routes, anything to steer clear of that eerie feeling. But no matter how far I drove, that hitchhiker's warning lingered. And every time I pass those spots, I can't help but wonder if there's something sinister lurking, if there's truth to his disturbing secret about the disappearances on this route. I've been driving trucks for years, mostly the night shift. It was just another regular night, cruising down the highway, when this strange message came through the radio. It was a garbled transmission, but I caught some words: danger, route, warning. I thought it was some interference or prank. But then I heard other truckers responding, their voices tense, asking for more details. The radio crackled with uncertainty, a sense of unease creeping in. I couldn't shake off that feeling, that sense that something was off. It was like this invisible weight settled in my chest, making it hard to breathe easy. Then, another transmission came through, clearer this time. It warned of an incident on our route, something about a roadblock and danger ahead. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't a joke, this was serious. Other truckers started talking about turning back or finding alternative routes. But I needed to make this delivery. It was my job, my livelihood. I decided to keep going, thinking maybe it was a false alarm. But the further I drove, the more anxious I became. The road felt emptier, darker somehow. There were no other cars in sight, just the eerie silence of the night. I noticed a few abandoned vehicles on the side of the road, like their owners just left them there in a hurry. It sent a shiver down my spine. Something was definitely wrong. Then, I saw it, a barricade ahead, blocking the road completely. My heart skipped a beat. I slowed down, trying to figure out what to do. The radio crackled again, warning of danger and telling everyone to turn back. But I couldn't turn around. I was already too far in. I decided to try and move the barricade, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. But as I got closer, I saw something, figures, shadows moving around the barricade. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. They weren't just shadows, they were people, standing there in the darkness, watching me. I felt this primal fear take hold of me, a fear I couldn't shake off. I tried to radio for help, but the signal was weak, filled with static. I was on my own. I couldn't see their faces, just their silhouettes in the dim moonlight. It was like they were waiting for something, for me. I maneuvered my truck to turn around, but as I did, they started moving towards me, slowly, deliberately. My heart raced, and I floored it, trying to get away from them. But then, my headlights caught something, symbols, markings on the road, strange and unfamiliar. It made my skin crawl. I had a gut feeling this wasn't a coincidence. It was planned, deliberate. I heard a loud bang, and my tire blew out. Panic surged through me as I struggled to control the truck. I managed to stop, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. I was stranded, surrounded by these shadowy figures. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could feel their presence, their intent. They started approaching the truck, slow and methodical. I tried calling for help again, but the radio was nothing but static. I was on my own in the middle of nowhere, facing something I couldn't comprehend. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out cautiously, trying to see who they were or what they wanted. But as the light hit them, they vanished, like they were never there. I was alone, stranded on that dark highway, with no explanation for what just happened. I felt this sense of dread, this fear that lingered even after I managed to fix my tire and get back on the road. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, my mind reeling from the experience. I tried to tell people what happened, but no one believed me. They brushed it off as fatigue or imagination. But I knew what I saw, what I felt. It was real, and it shook me to my core. I couldn't shake off that feeling of being watched, of encountering something on that road that I couldn't explain. I was driving down a lonely stretch of highway. I saw a convoy of trucks up ahead. Looked like a group traveling together, their headlights cutting through the darkness. I didn't pay much attention at first, just another convoy, I thought. But as I got closer, something felt off. They were driving slow, too slow for a highway. I figured maybe there was a reason, a problem with the vehicles or something. But then they signaled for me to join them, like they were waiting for me. I hesitated, but something about it seemed inviting. Maybe it was the loneliness of the road, or maybe it was just curiosity. I decided to join them, pulling in behind the last truck in the convoy. The drivers didn't seem hostile. They nodded at me as I fell in line. But as we drove on, I noticed things were different. They weren't talking on the CB, no casual chatter between truckers. It was dead silent, just the sound of engines and the hum of the road. I tried to strike up conversation, but they seemed uninterested, almost like they were ignoring me. It made me feel uneasy, like I didn't belong there. Then, I noticed something strange, the cargo they were carrying. It wasn't regular stuff, it looked unusual. Large, heavy crates covered in tarpaulins, like they were hiding something. I couldn't shake off the feeling that it wasn't normal cargo. I tried to focus on the road, but the tension in the air was thick. It felt like something was about to happen, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Suddenly, the convoy slowed down even more, almost to a crawl. I couldn't understand why. There was no traffic, no apparent reason to slow down like that. But they kept going, slower and slower. Then, one of the trucks ahead pulled off to the side of the road. It was like they knew where they were going, like it was planned. I felt this knot in my stomach, this urge to get away from them. But before I could react, the other trucks started blocking the road, hemming me in, trapping me in the convoy. Panic surged through me. I felt trapped, helpless. I tried to pull over and get out of there, but they wouldn't let me. They swerved, cutting me off, forcing me to stay in line. It was like they were hurting me, like I was part of their plan. I saw the drivers getting out of their trucks, all wearing dark clothes, masks covering their faces. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. I tried calling for help on the radio, but it was dead, no signal, no response. It was just me and them, alone on that desolate road. They started unloading the crates, revealing something inside. I couldn't see clearly, but it looked human. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I tried to reverse, to get out of there, but they were too fast. They surrounded my truck, blocking any chance of escape. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, this fear that I was in real danger. I tried to reason with them, begged them to let me go. But they didn't listen. They just kept working, like they were on a mission, like I was nothing but an obstacle in their way. I saw them dragging someone, towards one of the trucks. It was a person, tied up, gagged, helpless. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. It felt like a nightmare. I didn't wait to see more. I floored it, pushing through the blockade they'd made. I swerved onto the shoulder, dirt flying, not caring about the damage to my truck. I had to get away, had to escape from whatever horror they were planning. I drove for what felt like hours, not stopping until I reached a populated area, somewhere safe. I reported what I saw to the authorities, but I don't know if they believed me. Who'd believe such a crazy story? I've been driving trucks for as long as I can remember. One night, I was on a long haul and needed to refuel. I saw this remote gas station off the beaten path. It looked run down, but I didn't have much of a choice. My tank was almost empty. I pulled in. The place was eerily quiet. No other cars, No sign of life besides the flickering lights of the gas station. I figured the owner might be asleep or something. I parked my truck and got out. The air felt heavy, thick with silence. I approached the pump, but as I did, I noticed something strange. There were scratch marks on the ground, leading towards the back of the station, like something or someone had been dragged. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was probably some animal or just my imagination. I started pumping gas, but that's when I heard it, a faint sound, like someone whimpering. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the noise. It was coming from the back of the station. I hesitated, unsure if I should investigate. But that sound, that cry for help, it tugged at my conscience. I walked around the corner, and that's when I saw it, a door slightly ajar, a dim light seeping through. I felt this knot in my stomach, this sense of dread creeping in. I approached cautiously, pushing the door open slowly. What I saw, it shook me to the core. There was a small room, almost like a cellar, and inside, a person tied up, gagged, lying on the floor. I didn't know what to do. It was like a scene from a horror movie. I wanted to help, but I also felt this fear, this danger lurking in the shadows. Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there was this guy, the owner maybe, standing there, staring at me with cold, dead eyes. He didn't say a word, just glared at me. I felt this chill run down my spine. I tried to speak, to ask what was going on, but my words caught in my throat. He moved closer, slowly, his gaze unwavering. I could feel the tension in the air, this unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. I stepped back, my heart racing. I wanted to run, to get away from that place, but I felt frozen in fear. He finally spoke, his voice low and menacing. He said something about minding my own business, about leaving things be. But his words were vague, cryptic, like a warning. I knew I had to get out of there, to save myself. I turned and ran, not looking back, not caring about anything but escape. I reached my truck, adrenaline coursing through me. I didn't stop until I was miles away from that gas station. I called the police, told them what I saw, but I don't know if they believed me. That night haunted me, the image of that person tied up, the coldness in that man's eyes. It was like stumbling upon a nightmare, something I couldn't shake off. I pulled into this remote truck yard to catch some sleep. It was desolate, quiet, like a forgotten corner of the world. I parked my truck and settled in for the night. I woke up to a noise, a faint shuffling outside. I peered out the window, and that's when I saw it, a figure lurking among the parked trucks. I felt this surge of alarm. This was private property. No one should be here. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped out, trying to see who it was. As I got closer, the figure turned and faced me. It was a man, unkempt, eyes darting around nervously. I asked him what he was doing here, but he just stared at me, didn't say a word. I noticed something off about him, this unease creeping up my spine. He didn't look right, like he was hiding something. I tried to reason with him, to get him to leave. But he started acting strange, twitchy, like he was on edge. I felt this knot in my stomach, something wasn't adding up. He mumbled something about needing help, about being lost. But his words were vague, evasive. It felt like he was hiding the real reason he was here. I offered to call for help, but he refused, kept insisting he'd be fine. His behavior made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want trouble. I told him to leave, to go somewhere safe. But as I turned to go back to my truck, he lunged at me, his eyes wild, a knife glinting in his hand. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, heart pounding in my chest. He muttered something about needing my truck, about not having a choice. I didn't understand. He was desperate, unhinged. I tried to reason with him, to calm him down. But he was beyond reason, driven by some dark motive I couldn't comprehend. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my cool. I had to think fast, had to find a way out of this nightmare. I pretended to cooperate, to give him access to the truck. But as he moved closer, I made a run for it, sprinting towards the entrance of the yard. I could hear him behind me, chasing me with that knife. Adrenaline surged through me. I didn't look back, just focused on getting away. I reached the fence, scaled it as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I was far away from that place, far away from that man and his dark intentions. I called the authorities, told them what happened. But I don't know if they ever caught him. That night still haunts me, the fear, the adrenaline, that encounter with someone who had a dangerous motive in that remote truck yard. It's a memory I'll never forget, a brush with danger that shook me to the core. This one time, I got this job to transport crates from a warehouse to a storage facility a few states over. Seemed like a regular gig, nothing out of the ordinary. The crates looked normal enough, wooden boxes strapped down tight. But as I was loading them onto my truck, I noticed something off about them. There were these strange markings on the sides, nothing I'd seen before. Looked like scratches, but deeper, like they were carved in intentionally. I brushed it off, thinking it was just wear and tear from being shipped around. I strapped the crates in and hit the road. But the longer I drove, the more uneasy I felt about those markings. It was like they were staring at me, like they held some secret. I stopped at a rest area for the night, parked my truck and bunked in the cabin. But I couldn't shake off this feeling of unease. It felt like the crates were whispering something dark and unsettling. I decided to check them out, see if there was anything weird inside. I pried open one of the crates, and that's when I saw it, these strange symbols etched inside, almost like a language, but twisted, like something out of a nightmare. I felt this chill crawl up my spine. I slammed the crate shut and tried to shrug it off as some kind of prank or weird mistake. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing these faint whispers, like someone talking in a language I couldn't understand. I chalked it up to exhaustion and nerves, but it was like the whispers were coming from the crates themselves. The next day, I noticed weird things happening. My radio kept glitching out, static and strange noises filling the cabin. My phone wouldn't connect, no signal, nothing. I felt this sense of isolation, like I was cut off from the world. As I drove, I swore the crates started shifting on their own, like something inside was moving. I tried to brush it off, told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, the temperature in the cabin dropped, and I saw my breath in the air. It was the middle of summer, no reason for it to be that cold. I checked the heater, but it was working fine. It was like the air itself had turned icy. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and I swear I saw these figures, shadows moving around the crates. My heart raced, and I felt this primal fear take hold of me. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't right. I pulled over, tried to inspect the crates again. But when I opened them up, they looked normal, like before. No symbols, no strange markings. I thought I was losing my mind. I got back in the truck, determined to get to the storage facility and be done with this job. But as I drove, I felt this presence, this malevolent energy lingering in the air. It was like something was watching, something dark and sinister. I finally reached the storage facility, unloaded the crates as fast as I could. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake off this feeling of dread. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw it, those symbols, carved into the back of my truck. I sped away, heart pounding, not knowing what I'd stumbled into. I never took another job without checking twice, never forgot the unsettling feeling of that cargo and the inexplicable malevolence it brought along. I was cruising down this long stretch of road when I saw another truck ahead of me. Everything seemed normal until it happened. The truck swerved off the road, crashing into the barrier. I slammed on my brakes and pulled over, heart racing. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed towards the accident site. Smoke was billowing from the truck, and there was this eerie silence hanging in the air. I yelled out, asking if the driver was okay, but there was no response. I cautiously approached the wreck, afraid of what I might find. The front of the truck was crushed, glass shattered, metal twisted. I peered inside the cabin, and that's when I saw him, the driver. He was slumped over the steering wheel, blood on his face, not moving. My stomach turned. It was a chilling sight. I called emergency services, my hands trembling as I tried to explain what happened. I waited for what felt like an eternity, hoping for some sign of life from the driver. But as I stood there, something caught my eye, footprints leading away from the crash site. They were fresh, heading into the woods nearby. It didn't make sense. Why would someone leave the scene of an accident? I felt this uneasy feeling in my gut. I followed the footprints, my heart pounding with each step. The forest was dark, the trees casting long shadows. I felt like I was walking into something I shouldn't. As I ventured deeper, I saw something glinting on the ground. It was a necklace, something shiny. I picked it up, and it was familiar, the same necklace I saw the driver wearing earlier. My mind raced with questions. How did it end up here, away from the crash site? Why would someone leave their necklace behind? I heard a rustling in the bushes, and I froze. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. Fear gripped me. I felt exposed, vulnerable in that darkness. I decided to head back, to wait for the authorities. But as I turned around, I saw something in the distance, a figure, standing among the trees, watching me. I called out again, my voice trembling. But the figure just stood there, unmoving. It felt wrong, like they were hiding something, like they didn't want to be seen. I hurried back to the crash site, feeling this sense of urgency, this fear that something sinister was at play. The ambulance arrived, and they tended to the driver, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to this accident. I tried telling the authorities about the footprints, the necklace, the figure in the woods. But they brushed it off, said it was probably just my imagination, the stress of witnessing the accident. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that figure in the woods, the unanswered questions about the necklace, they haunted me. I felt like I stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to, something dark hidden behind that horrific accident. I'd been hauling cargo for hours, and fatigue was crawling into my bones. I rubbed my eyes, trying to stay alert. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing on the side of the road, barely visible in the shadows. My heart ticked up a notch. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? I squinted, trying to make out the person, but something felt off. The figure didn't move like a person should. It was all wrong, like it was gliding, not walking. I shook my head, thinking it was my tired mind playing tricks on me. Then it stepped onto the road. I slammed the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure, it was closer now, in the glow of my headlights. It wasn't a person. I know what I saw, and it wasn't right. It was like a person-shaped shadow, but empty. No features, just darkness. I swear, it looked at me. Not with eyes, but I felt it. Like it was peering into my soul. Fear rooted me to my seat. I wanted to speed away, but I couldn't move. My mind was screaming, but my body wouldn't obey. And then, in a blink, it vanished. Gone. No trace. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was losing my mind. But that chill, that feeling, it lingered in the air. I had to get out of there, had to keep driving, put distance between me and whatever that thing was. I hit the gas, heart pounding like a drum. Every shadow on the road made my skin crawl. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting that thing to be following me, but there was nothing. Just the empty road behind. I didn't stop until I reached the next rest area. Parked my rig, hands shaking as I lit a cigarette. I tried to make sense of it, tried to tell myself it was exhaustion or a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew. I'd seen something that wasn't supposed to be there. The rest of the trip was a blur. I kept my eyes on the road, didn't stop for anything. When the sun finally rose, it felt like a weight off my chest. But that image, the shadowy figure, haunted me. One night, I crossed paths with another trucker, this guy who seemed to have a chip on his shoulder. We were both headed in the same direction, and for some reason, he started tailing me, driving too close for comfort. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, but he kept at it, like he was deliberately trying to mess with me. Every turn I took, every lane change, he mimicked my moves, staying right on my tail. I tried to shake him off, speed up, slow down, but nothing worked. He was relentless, this game of cat and mouse turning into something unsettling. I finally pulled into a rest stop, hoping he'd just pass me by. But he followed suit, parking his truck right beside mine. He stepped out, this guy, tall and imposing, with this intense look in his eyes. He started accusing me of cutting him off on the road, of being a lousy driver. I didn't even remember him from earlier, but he was convinced I did something wrong. I tried to reason with him, to calm the situation down. But he wasn't having it. He was angry, aggressive. He got in my face, his words laced with threats. I knew I had to get out of there, to diffuse the tension. I got back in my truck, trying to leave, but he blocked my way, refusing to let me go. He started shouting, pounding on my window, this rage consuming him. I felt this chill run down my spine. Something was off about this guy, something unhinged. I managed to pull out, relieved to leave him behind. But that wasn't the end of it. He followed me, this twisted determination in his eyes. I tried calling for help on the CB radio, but it was just static. I was on my own, facing this guy who seemed to have lost his mind. He kept tailing me, driving aggressively, trying to force me off the road. I felt this fear gripping me, this realization that this wasn't just some road rage, this guy was dangerous. I made a split-second decision and took an exit, hoping to lose him in the smaller roads. But he followed, his truck roaring behind me. I saw a police car up ahead and tried to signal for help. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't an officer inside. It was him, wearing some makeshift uniform, trying to trick me. I swerved off the road, desperate for an escape. But he kept pursuing, this insane determination pushing him forward. I finally lost him in a maze of streets, but that fear lingered, the fear of encountering someone so unhinged, so consumed by rage and vengeance. I pulled over at the nearest town, heart racing, hands trembling. I reported what happened, but I don't know if they caught him. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that guy, his rage, his relentless pursuit, haunting me. It was a rivalry that spiraled into a nightmare, a terrifying encounter with someone who seemed to have lost touch with reality. My name is Gary, but people call me Gaz for short. I'm a 41-year-old trucker and love my job. Well, that was until one late-night job, when things took a turn. I was cruising down the highway when I noticed something strange, debris scattered across the road. I slowed down, trying to avoid it. It looked deliberate, like someone wanted to cause trouble. I brushed it off as a freak incident, but then it happened again. Another obstacle on the road, forcing me to swerve and dodge. This time, it was a bunch of tires strewn across the lanes. I started feeling uneasy, like someone was messing with me, targeting my truck deliberately. But I didn't know why. I hadn't crossed paths with anyone who'd have a grudge against me. I radioed in to warn other truckers about the hazards on the road. But as I did, I noticed something in the distance, a figure, standing by the side of the road, watching me. I felt this chill run down my spine. It was late, and seeing someone on a deserted highway, especially after those deliberate roadblocks, it didn't sit right. I decided to keep driving, hoping it was just a coincidence, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, it happened again, a barrier across the road, blocking the way. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, feeling trapped. I got out to inspect, trying to move the barrier, but it was heavy and sturdy. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there was someone, a man, approaching me. He looked angry, eyes fixed on me, like I was the cause of all this. He accused me of something I didn't do. He was yelling, threatening. I tried reasoning with him, explaining I had nothing to do with the roadblocks. But he wouldn't listen, wouldn't believe me. He was convinced I was the one causing trouble. I tried to call for help on my phone, but there was no signal, just this desolate stretch of road, this man accusing me of things I didn't do. I got back in my truck, desperate to get away from this situation. But as I drove off, he followed, his car tailing me closely. I felt this fear creeping in, this realization that I was being targeted, that this guy was after me, and I didn't even know why. He kept swerving, trying to cut me off, trying to force me to stop. I tried to lose him, take different turns, but he was relentless, this vengeful determination driving him. I saw a police car parked up ahead and sped towards it, hoping for help. But as I got closer, I realized it was empty, like a trap. I knew I had to do something, had to get away from this mad pursuit. I took a risky turn onto a smaller road, hoping I'd lose him in the twists and turns. I finally lost sight of him, but that fear lingered, the fear of being targeted by someone so consumed by vengeance, someone willing to put my life at risk for reasons unknown to me. I made it to a nearby town, shaking, heart racing. I reported the incident to the authorities, but I don't know if they ever found him. That night, sleep eluded me. The image of that man, his anger, his relentless pursuit, it haunted me. It was a nightmare on the highway, a terrifying encounter with an adversary who seemed determined to make my life a living hell. While on a familiar route, my GPS suddenly acted up. It rerouted me onto this unknown road, a narrow path surrounded by dense woods. It felt wrong, but I trusted the GPS, hoping it would get me back on track. As I drove deeper into the night, I noticed something eerie about this route. No other vehicles in sight, no signs of civilization. It was just me and the road, engulfed by darkness. I started feeling this sense of unease, this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. But I kept going, hoping to find my way back to the main highway soon. Then, I saw it, a figure standing by the side of the road. I slowed down, trying to make sense of it. It was a person, just standing there in the darkness, watching me. It sent shivers down my spine, but I convinced myself it was just someone stranded. As I continued, my truck's headlights flickered, casting strange shadows on the trees. I checked the dashboard, everything seemed fine, but that feeling of unease grew stronger. Suddenly, I saw another figure, then another, standing by the road ahead. They were just standing there, motionless. My heart raced. It felt like I stumbled into something sinister. I tried to turn around, but the road behind me was gone, swallowed by darkness. I was trapped on this unfamiliar path, surrounded by these eerie figures. I decided to keep driving, hoping to find a way out. But the figures multiplied, appearing on both sides of the road, their eyes reflecting in my headlights. It felt like they were closing in on me. I reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Panic started creeping in. I was completely isolated, lost in this maze of trees and unknown figures. Then, my truck's engine sputtered, coughed, and died. I tried to restart it, but it was no use. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by these silent, watching figures. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped out cautiously, trying to see who these people were. But as I shone the light, they vanished, like they were never there. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of being hunted. I turned back towards my truck, and that's when I heard it, whispers, faint voices coming from the woods. I didn't know what to do, whether to stay put or run. But the voices, they were getting closer, murmuring my name, calling out to me. I ran back to my truck, locked the doors, and huddled inside, trying to block out the voices. But they were everywhere, surrounding me, getting louder and clearer. I closed my eyes, trying to shut it all out. The voices spoke of things I couldn't understand, a language foreign yet familiar, sending chills down my spine. Hours passed, but the voices persisted, relentless. It felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in this nightmare with no escape. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence engulfed the woods, the figures vanished, and my truck started again as if nothing had happened. I drove away as fast as I could, not looking back, hoping to leave that haunting place behind. I've been trucking for years, driving through the night, moving cargo from one place to another. One evening, I was making good time, driving along a deserted stretch of highway when I saw something in the distance, a blockade across the road. I slowed down, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when a group of masked individuals emerged from the shadows, surrounding my truck. My heart pounded. This was trouble. They forced me to stop, banging on the doors, yelling commands. They were armed, menacing, and I knew resisting would only make things worse. They ordered me out of the truck, threatening me with weapons. I complied, trying to stay calm, trying to figure out what they wanted. But they were aggressive, forceful, not giving any explanation. They blindfolded me, tied my hands behind my back, and shoved me into their vehicle. I didn't know what was happening, why they were doing this. Fear clenched my chest. I was at their mercy. We drove for what felt like hours, the sound of their whispered conversations unsettling. I couldn't make out their plans, their intentions, just the sense of impending danger. They finally stopped, pulled me out of the vehicle, and dragged me into this abandoned building. It was dark, damp, a sense of dread lingering in the air. They threw me into a room, still blindfolded, still tied up. I heard them talking, discussing something dark, something sinister. My mind raced with possibilities. I didn't know what they were planning. Hours passed, and I was alone in that room, blindfolded, bound, the uncertainty and fear gnawing at me. I couldn't escape, couldn't understand why they targeted me. Then, they returned, their voices hushed but filled with a chilling determination. They forced me to stand, to follow their orders, threatening dire consequences if I resisted. They made me do unspeakable things, things that still haunt me to this day. I felt this sense of helplessness, this terror at the mercy of these assailants with their dark agenda. They seemed to relish in the fear they instilled, in the control they had over me. I tried to reason with them, to plead for my life, but they were ruthless, heartless. As the night dragged on, their intentions became clearer. They wanted to send a message, to create chaos, and I was just a pawn in their game. Eventually, they left me alone again, still bound, still blindfolded, the sounds of their movements echoing through the empty building. I didn't know if I'd ever see daylight again. Hours turned into an eternity, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, they returned, their demands becoming more threatening, more sinister. But then, as abruptly as it started, they released me. They left me in that desolate place, battered, terrified, but alive. They vanished into the night, leaving me to wonder why they chose me, what their twisted agenda truly was. So, I was driving through this lonely stretch of road when my truck suddenly sputtered and came to a halt. I checked the engine, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by darkness. I stepped out, hoping for a miracle, when I saw headlights approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me. Maybe this person could help me get back on the road. The car pulled up, and a guy stepped out, offering to lend a hand. He seemed friendly enough, willing to help. He said he knew a mechanic nearby and offered to drive me there. I hesitated, but I was desperate. I agreed, grateful for the assistance. I locked up my truck and got into his car, hoping this would solve my problem. As we drove, he started making small talk, asking about my journey. He seemed nice, but there was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. We reached the secluded area, far from any signs of civilization. I started feeling uneasy, but I trusted him. He led me towards this rundown building, claiming the mechanic was inside. But as we got closer, I realized something wasn't right. There was no sign of any mechanic, no lights, just this eerie silence. I turned to ask him what was going on, but he lunged at me, his demeanor shifting from friendly to menacing in an instant. Fear surged through me. I tried to push him away, but he was stronger. He pinned me to the ground, his intentions turning sinister. I struggled, fought with everything I had, but he was relentless, overpowering. He said things that sent shivers down my spine, things that made it clear he wasn't trying to help. His eyes held this darkness, this cruel intention that chilled me to the bone. I screamed for help, hoping someone would hear, hoping it was all a nightmare. But there was no one, just the echoes of my own fear. I managed to break free, ran as fast as I could, adrenaline pumping through me. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I couldn't run anymore. I found a place to hide, heart pounding, hands trembling. I didn't know if he was still looking for me, if he'd find me again. I stayed hidden, praying for daylight, praying for someone to pass by and rescue me. But the night dragged on, and the fear never left me. I finally dared to move, to find my way back to the road. I walked for what felt like an eternity, haunted by the memory of that encounter, the terror of encountering someone who seemed helpful but harbored such nefarious intentions. I made it back to civilization, reported what happened to the authorities, but I don't know if they ever found him. That night still haunts me, the realization that someone I thought was a savior turned out to be a predator, a nightmare on a dark road that I'll never forget. I've been in the trucking business for years, hauling cargo across the country. But lately, things have been tense between our company and another. It started with small disputes over routes and clients, but it escalated into something darker. One night, I was driving, my cargo securely loaded, when I noticed a truck from the rival company tailing me. They were aggressive, driving too close, honking, flashing their lights. I tried to ignore them, focus on the road, but they wouldn't back off. It felt like they were provoking me, trying to start something. I radioed my company, letting them know what was going on. They advised me to pull over and avoid a confrontation. But before I could do anything, the other truck swerved dangerously close, almost sideswiping me. My heart raced. This was dangerous. I sped up, trying to get away from them, but they matched my speed, driving recklessly, putting both of us and other drivers in danger. I saw an upcoming exit and took it, hoping to lose them in the smaller roads. But they followed, this rivalry turning into something beyond reason. I made a call to the authorities, but in that moment, I realized we were on our own, in the middle of a dangerous confrontation with no one to help. They tried to overtake me, ramming into the side of my truck. My cargo shifted, swaying dangerously. I fought to keep control, to avoid a collision, but it was chaos on the road. I saw an opportunity to lose them, a narrow path leading off the main road. I took it, hoping to evade them, but they followed, this rivalry turning into something dangerous and relentless. We were driving through winding roads, both trucks struggling to navigate. It was a high-stakes game, a dangerous chase fueled by this rivalry that spiraled out of control. They tried to box me in, forcing me off the road, but I fought back, desperate to protect my cargo, my life. I saw a chance to outmaneuver them, a risky move, but I took it. I swerved, trying to overtake them, but it went wrong. Our trucks collided, the impact sending both vehicles careening off the road. Everything spun out of control, metal scraped against metal, glass shattered, and then there was darkness. When I woke up, my head throbbed, my body ached. I stumbled out of my truck, dazed and disoriented. The other truck was a mangled wreck, a grim reminder of the devastation. I checked myself for injuries, for the extent of the damage, and that's when I saw it, a figure emerging from the other truck. They were hurt, disoriented, just like me. We both staggered towards each other, our rivalry forgotten in the face of this tragedy. We were both victims of this dangerous confrontation, both paying the price for a rivalry that went too far. I called for help, trying to assist the other driver, despite everything that had transpired. We waited for emergency services, both of us realizing the devastating consequences of this dangerous confrontation. As I stood there, waiting for help to arrive, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread, the realization that this rivalry, this dangerous escalation, led to this catastrophic night, with devastating consequences for both sides. It was a wake-up call, a horrifying reminder of how things could spiral out of control, how rivalry and competition could turn into something dangerous and destructive, leaving us both grappling with the aftermath of that fateful night. We were driving up north, my wife, our 2 kids, and me. It was late, and the road was eerily quiet, just our car humming along the empty highway. I thought it'd be a smooth ride, but things took a turn. Out of nowhere, this truck appeared behind us, its headlights glaring in our rearview mirror. I thought it was just another driver, but then they started tailgating us, getting too close for comfort. I sped up, thinking maybe they were in a rush, but they kept on our tail, driving aggressively. My heart raced. Something was off. I tried changing lanes, slowing down, but they mirrored our every move, this relentless pursuit that sent shivers down my spine. I radioed for help, but it was just static. No one responded. We were alone, this trucker chasing us, and I had no idea why. I saw an upcoming exit and took it, hoping to lose them in the smaller roads. But they followed, this chase escalating into something terrifying. I glanced back. The trucker's face was obscured, hidden behind the wheel. It felt like they were fixated on us, this chase becoming more frantic, more menacing. I took another turn, hoping we'd shake them off, but they kept following, this relentless pursuit that made my blood run cold. My wife was panicking, the kids were scared, and I was trying to keep it together, trying to protect my family from whatever was happening. The truckers started honking, flashing their lights, this aggressive behavior that felt threatening, dangerous. I saw a gas station up ahead and pulled in, hoping for safety in numbers. But they followed, parking their truck right beside ours, blocking our way out. I got out, trying to reason with them, to ask why they were doing this. But they stayed in their truck, just watching us, this unsettling silence hanging in the air. I felt this surge of fear, this realization that we were at the mercy of this unknown trucker, this nightmarish situation with no way out. I tried to call the police, but my phone was dead. We were isolated, vulnerable, and this trucker seemed determined to terrorize us. I got back in our car, and that's when things took a terrifying turn. The trucker revved our engine, ramming into our car, the impact jolting us. We were trapped, this dangerous encounter escalating into a life-threatening situation. I tried to protect my family, but we were helpless, at the mercy of this deranged trucker. I heard them shouting, their words muffled but filled with anger, filled with menace. It felt like a nightmare, this chase on a desolate road, this unknown assailant hell-bent on causing us harm. I managed to maneuver our car, finding a way out, and sped off, praying for safety, praying to leave that nightmarish encounter behind. We drove until we found a police station, and I reported what happened. But I couldn't shake off the fear, the terror of that encounter, the sheer helplessness of being chased by someone with unknown intentions. Even now, thinking about that night sends chills down my spine, the fear, the uncertainty, and the realization that we were just an unsuspecting family caught in a horrifying situation, chased by a trucker with dark and malicious intent. I've been trucking for years, moving cargo from one place to another, always stopping at different truck stops along the way. But one night, things took a turn for the worse. I pulled into a truck stop, thinking it'd be like any other routine stop. But then this guy parked next to me, blocking my way. I asked him politely to move, but he just glared at me, refusing. Tempers flared, words were exchanged, escalating into a heated argument. I didn't want trouble, just wanted to get going, but he seemed determined to start something. I tried to walk away, defuse the situation, but he followed, hurling insults, getting aggressive. I felt this sense of unease, this tension building up into something ominous. Other truckers tried to intervene, but it was too late. He swung at me, his fist connecting with my jaw, sending me staggering. I tried to defend myself, but it was chaos, this sudden violence erupting in the quiet of the night. Someone called the authorities, but by then, the damage was done. The brawl was over, but the tension lingered, this sense of unease settling in the air. I decided to leave, to get away from the hostility, but as I walked back to my truck, I felt eyes on me, this lingering hostility that made my skin crawl. I got in my truck, trying to shake off the encounter, but then I saw him, the guy from the fight, standing near my truck, this menacing look in his eyes. I locked the doors, but he started pounding on the windows, yelling threats. My heart raced. This was getting out of control, turning into a night of terror. I started my truck, trying to drive away, but he wouldn't let up, this relentless pursuit that sent me into a panic. I called for help on the radio, trying to get anyone to assist, but it was just static, no response. I was on my own, in this nightmare with no way out. I drove as fast as I could, trying to lose him, but he kept following, this relentless chase on the empty road. I saw a police car up ahead and sped towards it, hoping for safety. But as I got closer, I realized it was empty, this realization that there was no one to help. I took a risky turn onto a smaller road, hoping to lose him, but he followed, this nightmarish pursuit continuing. My mind raced, thinking of my family, hoping they were safe. I felt this overwhelming fear, this terror of being chased by someone consumed by rage and violence. I finally lost sight of him, but that fear lingered, the realization that this seemingly routine dispute turned into a night of terror, a fight for survival on a desolate road. I made it to a town, shaking, heart pounding, and reported what happened. But I couldn't shake off the fear, the trauma of that night, the sudden escalation of violence that turned a routine stop into a nightmare of terror and aggression. I've been driving trucks for years, used to the long hours and endless roads. One night, I picked up a hitchhiker, something I rarely do, but they looked stranded, so I thought, why not lend a hand? They seemed okay at first, just grateful for the ride. But as we drove, something felt off. Their answers to my questions were vague, their behavior unpredictable. I couldn't shake off this feeling of unease. I tried to make small talk, but they were mostly silent, just staring out the window into the darkness. It sent shivers down my spine, this silence, this tension building up in the cabin. I decided to focus on the road, hoping to reach our destination soon. But then they started asking strange questions, things that made me uncomfortable, probing into my personal life. I tried to brush it off, but their persistence was unsettling. It felt like they were prying into things they shouldn't, making me anxious. As the night wore on, I noticed them fidgeting, their movements erratic. I couldn't tell if they were nervous or hiding something, but the atmosphere in the truck grew more tense by the minute. I considered pulling over, asking them to get out, but the idea of leaving them stranded in the middle of nowhere didn't sit well with me. Then, they asked me to take a detour, claiming it was a shortcut. I hesitated, but they insisted, their tone changing, becoming more demanding. I glanced at them, their eyes held this intensity, this darkness that made my stomach churn. I didn't trust their intentions, didn't want to deviate from my route. But they grew agitated, almost aggressive, and I didn't want any trouble. So, I reluctantly followed their directions, hoping it wouldn't lead to trouble. The road became narrower, darker, isolated. I felt this sense of dread, this sinking feeling in my gut, regretting my decision to listen to them. Then, they asked me to stop in the middle of nowhere, claiming they needed to get out. But something felt wrong. This wasn't a place anyone would willingly want to stop. I slowed down, and that's when they lunged at me, grabbing the steering wheel. Panic surged through me. I fought to regain control, to stop the truck. I managed to pull over, trying to comprehend what was happening. They bolted out of the truck, disappearing into the darkness, leaving me shaken, bewildered. I didn't know what their intentions were, why they did what they did. I locked the doors, heart pounding, and waited for them to be out of sight. I didn't sleep that night, the encounter replaying in my mind, the fear, the tension, the uncertainty of their motives. I reported it to the authorities, but they were long gone. I never picked up hitchhikers again after that, haunted by the memory of that night, the unknown passenger whose intentions were unclear, whose presence turned a routine ride into a night of tension and fear on the road. I've been a trucker for the best part of 20 years, transporting all sorts of goods from one place to another. Sometimes, I have to make cargo exchanges at remote locations. One night, I had a pickup at this isolated spot. The place was desolate, surrounded by dense woods, with just a small shed where the exchange was supposed to take place. I arrived a little earlier than expected, and the place was eerily quiet. I parked my truck and waited, trying to pass the time. But then, I saw a couple of shadowy figures approaching the shed. Something felt off, but I tried to brush it off as nerves. As I got closer, I realized they weren't alone. There were more of them lurking in the shadows, their faces obscured. I started feeling uneasy, this exchange taking on a more sinister vibe. I hesitated, considering leaving, but I couldn't risk losing the job. So, I cautiously approached the shed, my senses on high alert. They were exchanging the cargo, but the atmosphere was tense. They seemed edgy, glancing around nervously, as if expecting trouble. Then, I saw it, a glimpse of what they were handling. It wasn't ordinary cargo, it was something illegal, something dangerous. I felt a knot in my stomach, realizing I had stumbled into something I shouldn't have. I tried to act nonchalant, but inside, I was panicking. I needed to get out, but I couldn't just leave in the middle of the exchange. I had to play it cool, pretend everything was normal. But then, one of them noticed me watching, and that's when things took a terrifying turn. They started advancing towards me, their eyes filled with hostility. I felt like a deer caught in headlights, frozen with fear. I turned to run, but they were quick to corner me. They demanded to know what I saw, threatening me with consequences if I didn't comply. I tried to reason with them, to convince them I hadn't seen anything, but they weren't buying it. They were menacing, getting more aggressive by the second. I knew I had to get out of there, no matter the cost. So, I made a run for it, darting towards my truck. I could hear them shouting, their footsteps pounding behind me. I managed to reach my truck, adrenaline pumping through me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, heart racing, hands trembling. I reported what happened to the authorities, but I couldn't shake off the terror, the realization that I had stumbled into something dangerous, something illegal. That night haunted me, the fear, the adrenaline, the realization of how close I had come to something sinister. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I narrowly escaped a situation that could have turned deadly, all because of a routine cargo exchange gone terribly wrong. I remember that night so clear, like it was yesterday. I was driving my rig down that lonesome highway, just me and the road. The only thing on my mind was getting that load to its destination on time. But things took a turn when I pulled into a rest stop to grab a bite and stretch my legs. There was this guy, seemed normal at first, asked for a light for his smoke. We got talking, and he mentioned he knew a shortcut that could save me some time. Sounded good to me, so I followed his directions, not thinking much of it. The road got narrower, darker, and I had this feeling like something wasn't right. But I kept going, trying to shake off the unease. Then, out of nowhere, I see flashing lights behind me. Cops. My heart's pounding, and they start questioning me about the cargo. I didn't know what they were talking about at first. Stolen goods? No way. But they had proof, papers and all, showing that the stuff in my truck wasn't legit. I felt sick to my stomach, trapped in a mess I didn't even know was there. They said I was involved, that I knew what I was hauling. But I didn't. I swear, I didn't. They kept grilling me, and I couldn't prove a thing. My whole world was crashing down, and I was stuck in some kind of nightmare. They took me to this small, rundown station. Cold, dimly lit, with these officers giving me the stare like I was some criminal mastermind. I'm just a guy driving a truck, trying to make a living. Hours passed. Questions after questions. I felt like I was drowning, caught up in something way bigger than me. I pleaded, tried to explain, but they weren't buying it. And then, they let slip something about the people I was hauling for. Big shots. Dangerous folks. They left me there, alone in that station, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Every creak of the building, every sound outside, made my skin crawl. I wanted to run, to get out of there, but where could I go? Then came this guy, a real shifty-looking character. He wasn't an officer, but he had this air about him, like he owned the place. Said he could get me out of this mess, for a price. I didn't have a choice. I was desperate. He led me out, into the dark, whispering threats, telling me to keep quiet or else. I was shaking, thinking about my family, not knowing what was happening to me. He made me drive, guiding me through back roads, away from anyone who could help. I couldn't see much in the darkness, just his shadowy figure next to me, giving directions with this chilling calmness. My mind was racing, imagining the worst scenarios, feeling like I was walking into a trap. Eventually, we pulled up to this secluded spot. A warehouse. He told me to wait, to keep quiet, and disappeared into the darkness. I was alone again, surrounded by this eerie silence that made my heart race even faster. Minutes felt like hours. I was trembling, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then, I heard voices. Whispering, muffled conversations that sounded way too close. I wanted to bolt, but fear had me frozen in place. They came out of nowhere, these shadowy figures. They surrounded the truck, speaking in hushed tones, and started unloading the cargo. It hit me then I was in the middle of some shady deal, and I was just a pawn. I felt sick, my head spinning with thoughts of what would happen next. They were ruthless, cold, not caring about who I was or what they were putting me through. I was disposable. I had to get out of there. I waited for what felt like the right moment, when they were distracted by their business. Then I hit the gas, praying I wouldn't hit anyone in the darkness. I sped away, not looking back until I was miles away, heart pounding, hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I found a crowded rest stop, surrounded by people. I was safe, but the terror of that night stayed with me. I reported what happened, but who would believe a trucker caught up in some criminal mess? I quit, couldn't bear the thought of being pulled back into that nightmare. Now, every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, feel that fear all over again. I'm haunted by the realization that in the world I thought I knew, danger lurks in every corner, even in the places I thought were safe. Most nights are routine as a trucker for a small firm, mostly just me and the road. But there was this night all that I'll never forget. It was late, the highway deserted. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rattling of the cargo in the back. The darkness outside was suffocating, the kind that plays tricks on your mind. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. My heart skipped a beat. It was unnerving, this lone figure in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down, curious and concerned. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman, standing there, motionless. She looked lost, almost ghostly in the pale moonlight. I debated whether to stop, but something compelled me to. Maybe she needed help, or maybe it was just a trick of the mind. I pulled over, rolled down the window, and asked if she was okay. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine. There was something about her gaze that sent a chill down my spine. It felt like she was looking right through me, her expression unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring. I felt this unease creeping in, this sense that something wasn't right. I asked again if she needed help, but she didn't respond. It was unsettling, this silence stretching on in the dead of night. I considered driving off, but I couldn't shake off this feeling that I needed to help her. I got out of the truck, cautiously approaching her. That's when she spoke, her voice barely a whisper, almost haunting. She asked for a ride, her words sending shivers down my spine. I hesitated, unsure, but something in her eyes made me relent. I gestured for her to get in, and she did, sitting silently in the passenger seat. I tried to make conversation, but she remained quiet, almost too quiet. It was eerie, this silence between us as we drove on. I glanced at her from time to time, but she just stared straight ahead, her face expressionless. As the miles passed, I started feeling this sense of dread, this inexplicable fear. It felt like the air in the truck had grown heavier, suffocating. I decided to break the silence, to ask where she was headed. But when I turned to her, she wasn't there. The passenger seat was empty, sending a shock through me. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over frantically, looking around in disbelief. But she was nowhere to be seen, just the empty road and the eerie silence of the night. I searched the truck, every corner, every crevice, but she was gone. It didn't make sense. She couldn't have just vanished into thin air. I got back on the road, heart racing, mind spinning with confusion. The rest of the journey felt like a blur, haunted by that chilling encounter. I made it to my destination, shaken and rattled. I tried to make sense of what happened, but it felt like a nightmare, a surreal encounter that left me questioning reality. I reported it to the authorities, but they couldn't find any trace of her. It was as if she had never existed, as if it was just a figment of my imagination. But I couldn't shake off the feeling, that chilling encounter on that night hall, the inexplicable fear, and the lingering sense of unease that stayed with me long after that eerie night. I've been driving trucks for ages, long, lonely stretches of road, nothing unusual. But this night was different. It was unsettling. I picked up a hitchhiker, a guy who looked like he needed a lift. He seemed ordinary, a little quiet maybe, but nothing out of the ordinary. We chatted a bit as we drove, nothing too deep, just passing the time. But then he got this strange look in his eyes, like he was lost in thought or something. It made me uncomfortable, this sudden change in demeanor. I pulled into a gas station to refuel and stretch my legs. But when I turned to talk to the guy, he was gone. Vanished into thin air. I thought I was losing it. Maybe he had slipped away while I wasn't looking, but there was no way. I would have heard the door or seen him walking away. I searched around the station, but he was nowhere in sight. It was like he had never been there, like I'd imagined the whole thing. I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was chilling, this mysterious disappearance that made no sense. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he hitched another ride or something, but that feeling of unease lingered. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to reappear out of nowhere. I got back in the truck, heart racing, hands trembling. I felt this sense of dread creeping in, this fear that I couldn't shake off. I drove on, but every shadow, every noise, made me jump. I kept glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting him to materialize there. I stopped at another gas station further down the road, trying to calm my nerves. But that's when things took a turn for the worse. I saw him, or at least I thought I did, standing in the distance, watching me. I blinked, and he was gone again. It was impossible. It had to be a trick of the mind. I hurried back to the truck, feeling this creeping paranoia, this fear that I couldn't shake off. I locked the doors, checking and rechecking, but that feeling of being watched lingered. I drove faster, trying to put distance between me and whatever was haunting me. But then, I saw him again, in my rearview mirror, standing on the side of the road, just watching. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was racing, and I felt this panic rising inside me. I drove and drove, not stopping until I reached a crowded rest area. I tried to explain what happened to the authorities, but it sounded crazy, like I'd lost my mind. They searched the area, but there was no sign of the hitchhiker. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I couldn't sleep that night, haunted by that eerie encounter, that hitchhiker who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. I kept thinking I was being watched, that he was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Even now, I can't shake off the fear, the uncertainty of what happened that night. That hitchhiker, his mysterious disappearance, and the lingering feeling that something wasn't right, something beyond explanation, still terrifies me. One night, my boss asked me to do this off-the-books job. He said it was urgent and needed it done ASAP. It was past midnight when I got the call. My boss sounded tense, almost urgent, telling me to meet someone at this remote location. I hesitated, but the pay was good, and I didn't want to let my boss down. I arrived at the designated spot, this isolated area surrounded by dense woods. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I parked my truck, feeling this sense of unease settling in. A guy approached me. He looked shifty, shady almost. He handed me a package, telling me to deliver it to another location. It felt sketchy, this off-the-books gig, but I needed the cash. I took the package, trying not to think too much about it. But as I drove, I couldn't shake off this feeling that something was off, something sinister about the whole thing. I pulled into a desolate area to take a break, to grab a bite to eat. But then I noticed it, this figure lurking in the shadows. I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but the feeling of dread intensified. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my meal, but I couldn't shake off this sense of being watched, this lingering paranoia. I got back in the truck, trying to push the unease aside. But then, there was this knock on the window. I froze, heart pounding, not wanting to look. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw him, this man staring at me, his eyes piercing, almost menacing. He asked about the package, demanding to know where I was taking it. I didn't know what to say, feeling this overwhelming fear. He looked dangerous, this sinister aura around him that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to play it cool, to bluff my way out of it, but he wasn't buying it. He threatened me, this chilling promise of consequences if I didn't comply. I didn't want trouble, just wanted to get out of there. So, I handed him the package, hoping it would satisfy him. But he wasn't done. He wanted more, wanted information about my boss. I refused, fear tightening its grip on me. He grew more aggressive, and I knew I had to get away. I started the truck, driving off as fast as I could, this overwhelming sense of relief flooding over me. But that relief didn't last long. I saw him in the rearview mirror, chasing after me, this relentless pursuit that sent me into a panic. I drove faster, trying to lose him, heart racing, mind spinning with fear. I made it to a gas station, seeking safety in the crowds, hoping he wouldn't follow. I reported what happened to the authorities, but I couldn't shake off the terror, the fear of that chilling encounter,